Hello, everybody. We're on our next lecture. We are starting on a completely new section of anthropology. This is my personal favorite. We are doing social culture anthropology. Um, and in this first couple, we're going to be learning about basically what it is. And then after that, we'll be doing a little more fun stuff. Real quickly, this week, nothing's due except for the quiz. Make sure you get the quiz in. Other than that, should be good. You should have already turned in your reflection 2. Uh, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. All right. So, during this lecture, I want you to think about what is the main difference between something that is natural and something that's cultural, right? So even right now, like what is something that you can describe as cultural? What is something you can describe as natural? And what's the difference? Okay. So yeah, actually, I'm not even gonna say anything because I don't want to confuse you. At the end, we'll circle back. So social culture anthropology is the study of human society and culture. This subject describes, analyzes, interprets, and explains social and cultural similarities and differences. It's pretty straightforward, right? It studies society and studies culture. As you can probably tell, it's very interesting on a more superficial level, like studying how, how, I don't know, like how Chinese communities, were founded after having to what's it called? Build the railroads, right? Where do they settle? How do they settle? What do they create? How does Chinatown get its produce? How do people live there? Stuff like that. It's pretty straightforward, right? If you guys are again thinking of a more kind of classic example, the only recent thing I can think of I could use as an example is if you guys have ever heard of Sentinelese Island, which is the island off of India, I believe. I think it's off of India, and it's protected by India, the Indian government. And that island has a population of completely a population of humans that are completely untouched by like modern civilization. And the Indian government is responsible and literally has money set aside to protect them from other people interfering with them. Anyways, if they wanted to, they could send an anthropologist over there. An anthropologist would go over there, live with them, learn the way they eat, learn the way they talk, learn the way they holidays, learn how they think, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is social cultural anthropology. All right, now one of the most important things about this class is going to be the understanding of the word culture. Okay, culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Okay. Enculturation is when, or sorry, I wouldn't even say that. Let's talk about the definition first, right? So a lot of people they look at culture and they think about belief, arts, and customs, right? But really, culture is much more than that. Okay. Those are kind of like the fun parts of culture. But there are a lot of not as interesting, but just as important parts of culture, including the things that are listed here, but anything really. So what really defines culture is something that is acquired, right? Something that is learned. And that's kind of correlates to our first question at the beginning of the of the lecture, where it says where it talks about oh shoot, did my friend just message me? Sorry, hold on. Give me 1 second. Where basically we asked like what's the difference between something that's natural and that's cultural. One of the big differences is that when it's cultural, it's acquired, right? It means that it's achieved, it's gotten, right? You're not born with it, right? Culture is something that you learn. Okay. So basically for this, I mean it doesn't stay consistent for most things, but if we're in this class, it basically is for everything. If it's something that is learned by a person, that means that it is cultural, right? So all these other things, your beliefs, your arts, what you consider art, what you consider music, all these other things are dictated by our culture, right? Our surroundings. Okay. Now that's the first thing. So it needs to be learned. Okay. Number two, you need to be a member of society. What does that mean? That means that it cannot exist individually, right? It can only exist if there is society, basically like two or more people. Okay. If not, then it's not culture because it's just in you. Does that make sense? It doesn't say that you don't have an influence of culture, but it means that if you are thinking of something, for example, let's say you try to create your own language, but you only speak it to yourself. That is not cultural. And in fact, that might not even be a language because you cannot communicate with someone else about it, right? So culture, in order for culture to exist, it needs to be acquired, which means learned, and you also need to be a member of society. Okay. Now, how do people learn culture? Okay. People acquire culture by growing up in particular societies in which they are exposed to a specific cultural tradition, and culturation is a process by which a child learns his or her culture. Pretty straightforward, right? Enculturation is the process by which a person learns their culture, right? This gets a little dicey later on, but just for your own information, technically it's like people learning culture. It could be anything. But when you hear the word enculturation, they're usually referring to kids, like from youth growing up. Okay. Later on, they'll be talking about maybe as an adult. The situation is a little bit different. Okay. And notice they say the word exposed here. We're going to talk about that in a second. But it's not just directly learning culture, it's also indirectly learning culture. Okay. Now, real quickly before we move on, what are some of the major ways in which you absorb your culture? Your family, okay. Your school, your immediate environment, so I would kind of like your neighborhood, right? And a big one today is entertainment, right? Or actually, it's a big one overall, but it's especially prevalent today with like social media stuff, right? But those are kind of like the 4 or 5 big categories of influence on you, right? And it's interesting because if you look at the influence, it's really difficult to say which one is more influential or less influential. One of the interesting things, one of the conversations I have in my class usually is what's more influential, you, your family, or school, right? And usually people will say family, but in reality, actually, a lot of times it's school. Not because it's more important or less important, but because it is somewhere where you spend most of your day, right? And at least a lot of people I know, their parents work, jobs where they get home late or whatever. How often are you really seeing your parents at that age? It really depends, right? And so that's why it's a little bit different. So those are all things to consider. Why is social media so impactful, right? It's not just the time, it's also the entertainment factor of it. There's a lot of things to consider when we're talking about how we're enculturated day to day. But main point is those are the ways that we learn culture usually. Family, what's it called? Entertainment, school, and your like immediate environment, right? Your neighborhood or wherever you're spending most of your time, which is again usually your environment. Okay, so moving on. Culture is learned, right? So we just learned that cultured is learned. In fact, one of the main qualities of culture, for it to be culture at all, is that it's learned. So humans uniquely learn through symbols. Symbols are signs that have no necessary natural connection to the things they stand for or signify. So this is just a human quality overall, which is very special to to the animals, I guess, or is that we can learn through symbols. What does that look like? Honestly, everything we do is learning through symbols, so it's going to be kind of hard to find an example for you. But for example, if you were to you see martial artists when they it's called shadow boxing, when they're like basically fighting the wind, or when they're hitting the bag, right? Now, are they actually fighting there? No, right? But they are practicing fighting by hitting the bag, right? Our ability to practice fighting through hitting the bag is a very special quality that only humans have, essentially, right? It's again symbolically learning something. But that being said, that's kind of like an example that I use just because it's a little bit more clear. But literally, you listening to me talking and learning is an example of symbolic learning because what I'm talking about is not something that you're directly doing. If that makes sense, right? It's something that you're learning symbolically. Okay, so that being said, there are 3 ways in which we learn culture: experience, social, and observation. Okay, so experience, right, would be um if I am a math teacher, I think this is probably gonna be a quiz question. If I am a math teacher, okay, and I ask the class, what's 2 plus 2? Okay. And then you, instead of raising your hand, yell it out. 4. And then I'm like, you just broke the rules that you have to raise your hand. You're going to, I don't know, stand in a corner for 5 minutes, right? Time out. Or everyone is going to be mean to you for a little bit because they think that you're not supposed to yell. Whatever it is, okay? That's experience. You're literally facing the consequences of not following the social norm, okay? Now, social, okay? Social is pretty straightforward. I asked the class, what is 2 plus 2? And then you are about to yell at 4, and then your friend's like, wait, no, you got to raise your hand. Okay, through your friend, you learned that you need to raise your hand, and you did not yell, right? That is another way of learning a cultural rule. Finally, there's observation. This is probably the most common one that people don't think about. Observation. I asked the class, what's 2 plus 2? And you're about to say 4, but then you look around and you see that, oh, wait, no one else is yelling. Maybe I shouldn't yell. That is observation. Okay. And so, as you can tell by these examples, sometimes culture is taught directly, but it is also internalized indirectly. Okay. Now, the reason why that example isn't perfect is because technically, as the teacher, right, I'm a human, obviously, and me telling you that raising your hand isn't, I'm sorry, that yelling out instead of raising your hand isn't the way to go is also an example of social, right? So it's kind of a, you have an example, but you kind of get the point, okay? Now, you know, uh, experience. So yeah. So I'm thinking of some fun examples. One of the things that is very interesting, right, is that you have to understand that culture is not absorbed directly. It's not always direct. It's also indirect, right? I always remember when I was younger, it was really cool to wear baggy pants, and my parents thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. But I wore baggy pants because I saw a 50 Cent video and I loved the video, or I thought he looked really cool, and then I got baggy pants, right? So it was through the observation of 50 Cent in that video that, it was cool. But it was also not just that, it was also observing other like my friends and stuff that made it pretty obvious that this was a cool thing to do. And so I followed that trend by wearing baggy pants. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, culture is not always direct. It's actually mostly not direct. And is also indirect, right? So, but let me give you an example of something that's direct, right? If oh, like your mom, your parents teaching you manners. That's a very easy. Let's see, this is better with the light on. Ugh, it's so pale. It doesn't matter. It's a little box anyway. But anyways, like let's say like our parents teaching us manners, right? Like, oh, make sure to say hi to Uncle, John and Auntie Jane, right? Or don't put your elbows on the table. That is you directly learning certain cultural things. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we move forward. Culture is an attribute not of individuals per se, but of individuals and members of groups. So this is kind of similar to what that original definition was, right? You need to be a part of society. Enculturation unifies people by providing us with common experiences. Today's parents are yesterday's children. Very little of what we think is original or unique. Okay, now let's hold it here. What do I? So this also might be a quiz question, probably not though, because I got the other one. The other one's pretty good. Actually, let me write it down so I don't forget. But I have a freaking pen. That's stupid. Let's write that over here. So today's parents are yesterday's children. The reason why I put that quote in there is because I want you to think of culture as scaffolding. Like the in construction when they have like the scaffolds. If you go to like Midtown, there's always scaffolding everywhere, right? But the main point is that it's built on top of each other. That's scaffolding, right? And that's what culture is. It's scaffolding. It never exists on its own. It's always built off of something in the past, right? Always, no matter what. It has to be. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. Okay. So let's talk this further. Enculturation unifies people by providing us with common experiences. Today's parents are just as children. So I want to move away from culture being considered something that's like geographical, right? Like Chinese culture, Mexican culture, what's it called, American culture, because those things are great, but what they're really designating is a certain place, this is a country, and in some ways it's descriptive, but in most ways it's not very descriptive at all. And more importantly, culture does not, just because you're born in a certain country does not mean you have a certain type of culture. You could be locked in. There's a lot of people that don't know I'm mad tight that live in Brooklyn, right? And it's because they do not go through the things that most Brooklyn people go through. And so, are you going to tell me that they're not that they're not like, New Yorkers or Brooklyners or whatever? I mean, yeah, you could, but it's also like, why go through that, right? Just be a little more specific about what you're talking about, because a lot of people who, again, do not participate in most of the Brooklyn things will not know the Brooklyn things that you're referring to. Okay. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The reason why I'm saying this is because common experiences is what creates a cultural similarity, right? So it's no surprise that people in Brooklyn are familiar with something that, okay, people from Kingsborough are familiar with how annoying the B1 and the B49 are, right? That's a pretty distinct thing all across the students, because everyone knows how freaking annoying it is to take the bus there. Okay. Now, that is something that could unify us. When I say unify us, I mean it's something we can talk about. It's something that we can relate to as Kingsborough students or as people that go to Kingsborough, right? That being said, though, like I said earlier, there are always exceptions, right? There might be the person that just drives to Kingsborough. There might be the person that only gets dropped off at Kingsborough. Those things also would factor in. Okay. But common experiences creates unification, or creates whatever, a cultural similarity between those people. Okay. Now, the thing I want to bring up is if you think about school lunches, right? School lunches. If you grew up in America and you went to high school in America, we can have a whole conversation about school lunches. I'm not even from New York, right? And I'm from the Bay Area, and it's still something that we can talk about all day, right? Because it's a common experience, right? Most of our schooling has a lot of similarities within the country. Now, that's not exactly the same, of course, but it is similar enough. And those types of experiences create unification, or create whatever you relationship, whatever you want to call it, right? It creates some kind of comfort when we're talking to each other. Now, what's important though is, right, is like, again, the separation between geography and like the reality of culture, right? So like, yes, am I Chinese American? Absolutely. But would I have more in common maybe hanging out with you guys in the class? Or would I have more in common with someone that's from China that came like 2 months ago? Probably more with you guys. Does that make sense? Even if it was a professor of anthropology, I would have more in common with you guys because I live here, right? So that's kind of like, if you were to analyze my culture and be like, which one would you feel more comfortable with, or which one would you do you have more understanding of? That's how you would cut it up, right? Yeah, that dude could be Chinese, but like, quite frankly, I feel more comfortable speaking English, you know, and there's more of the American things that I'm used to than I am in China, right? So in this way, right, we're looking at culture. Let's try to separate our the geographical culture and also the non-geographical, the day-to-day culture. Okay. Now, this last part, very little what we think is originally unique. Okay, and that's really talking about the scaffolding, right? It's not to say that it's not unique or that it's not special. It's just that it doesn't come out from nowhere, right? It has to be connected to something. People's ideas of what is fashionable is based off of their previous understandings of fashion, the previous exposures to fashion, right? People tend to spend time with others that share cultural backgrounds. This often leads to being with people that share values and thus have similar opinions. Now, this is very important. When we say similar values and thus have similar opinion, it does not mean you're thinking the same. It just means that you might have the same values, right? And what does that mean? That means that Have you guys ever been on a Facebook group and like the Republicans and the freaking Democrats are going to each other, like going into each other? So you might say to yourself, why they have nothing in common? Why are they with each other? In fact, they have a lot in common. One of the things they have in common is that they're on Facebook and they like to argue people. That's the first thing, right? But number two is if we're talking about Democrat, Republican things, they care about the legal system. That is another big circle of values that they share, right? So when we talk about this stuff, if everything is always going to be connected to something else, that's like very important in anthropology, right? And in this particular case, nothing is completely original or completely unique. It is unique in that it's special, right? We talk about human imagination, we think about things differently, but it is not unique in the sense that something else that we've been through day to day has influenced our thinking. Okay. So keep that in mind. Okay. All right. So this is a fun question. There are natural biological urges we share, but it is always modified by culture, right? Now, if you can think of a natural biological urge, okay, biological urge, not biological function, biological urge that we share that is not modified by culture, I will give you an A. Okay, because at least to my knowledge, there are none, and there should be none, right? Everything we do is modified by culture, right? So, what are some of the most important biological urges, right? Food, water, sex, sleep, using using the restroom, right? These are all things that are very essential for our biological life, but they are all modified by culture, right? Food is a big one. There are literally certain holidays, certain reasons that you will not eat, right? I know for Ramadan, they don't eat from was it sun up, sun down, right? If you ask a dog or if you ask an animal to do that, will they be able to do that? Probably not, right? Especially if they're hungry. For turkey, I'm sorry, for Thanksgiving, we purposely eat turkey. We eat a lot of it. For birthdays, we have like cake. For intermittent fasting, you don't eat for 6 to 8 hours, whatever, right? There's a lot of reasons why we don't eat, and they're all cultural. Okay. Now, sleep, that's a big one. You might ask, how is sleep modified by culture? Well, when do you wake up? You wake up an hour or whatever before your class starts, or you wake up an hour or whatever before work, right? If you didn't have work or your class at that time, would you be waking up at that time? Probably not. Okay. So all of these things are heavily modified by culture. And again, if you can think of a biological what's it called? A biological urge that is not modified by culture, you will get an A in this class. I will like literally just give you an A. I'm pretty sure there's none. Some people have tried to get cute with it, but nope. Everything is modified by culture, right? One of the students said childbirth. Childbirth is heavily modified by culture. What is considered healthy for a child to be born? What type of care are you gonna receive depending on your insurance? Are they gonna let you lay there forever, or are they gonna artificially induce labor because your time is getting close to over or whatever? Or do you do a natural birth or a whatever hospital birth, right? Do you use a midwife? There's a lot of things that we do that modifies our birthing of children. Okay. I just gave you a bunch of examples, so you don't need this, but think about health and what is healthy. How do you know if something's healthy or not? One of the things I do in class is I just ask people, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of health, right? And just go boom, boom, boom. Vegetables, pills, hospital, running, exercise. Like these are all different things that people have understanding of health, and while they may be part of a similar definition, they are not exactly the same, right? And so, as you can tell from that, right? Health, which is something that feels like it's objective, it's like unchanging, is very much dependent on your cultural understanding of what healthy is. Okay. So cultures everywhere and everybody. Cultures defined anthropologically encompasses features that are sometimes considered trivial or unworthy, right? So I have the piece ethnography here. Just a reminder, we're actually going to watch a video about what ethnography is in a second, but for grad school, one of the activities I did was that I did a pizza ethnography where I literally just sat in like a random it was a good pizza place though. I sat in a pizza place, asked them if I could do it, and they're like, cool. I just sat there and watched them for like 2 hours. It was just an exercise I did for my class. And one of the fun things I found out, right, was that people who were mostly from New York or working here or had lived there for a long time, they called pizza a regular slice, while people who were visitors or tourists would call it a cheese slice. Now, is this 100% accurate? Obviously not, but it is something that was an interesting observation that I made at the time, right? And it's something that only you could do if you were literally just sitting there watching them. If you didn't do that, you wouldn't be able to catch it, right? So these are kind of the boring things that anthropologists are interested in. Why are they interested in boring things? It's because it is only through your pattern of behavior that we can determine any kind of truth or anything from that. It is from your behavior. We cannot like rely necessarily on what you say because a lot of us say things that are different from what we're actually thinking. Okay. So culture are not haphazard collections of customs and beliefs. Cultures are integrated pattern systems. If one part of the system changes, other parts also change, right? So I want you guys to stop thinking of culture as like kind of like a bullet point list of stuff. It's not, right? Chinese people think that the red is good luck. Chinese people like to respect their elders. Chinese people, I don't know, have a lot of or eat a lot of vegetables. I guess that's yeah, doesn't matter. Main point is yes, that's a bullet point list, and yes, those are true. But why does it matter? Like, how does it affect their daily life, right? When you think about culture, culture is a connection of things that are related to each other, and when one part of it changes, everything else also changes. Notice I did not say ripple effect because the ripple effect is kind of like a same circle that expands out from the drop. So I don't like to use that example. So the example I have here is a woman working, right? So during World War II, a lot of women started working, right? For obvious reasons. What was the main reason? They needed more money, right? So they started working. Now, some of the more direct things changed, right? Like acceptance of women in the workplace, right? Women were not required to wear dresses; they could wear pants. You know, they were at first they were not considered a serious whatever worker, and now they are considered, you know, now they are accepted in the workplace, but also like bosses, right? They are actually bosses. And actually in today's workplace, they are just like every other worker, but back in the day they weren't, right? And so that's a great result of that change, right? That's a direct thing. That's very easy to see. Once women started working, then women were more accepted in the workplace. That's a clear, direct line as to which one relates to which, right? But one of the things that's not as clear and what was a huge influence was the explosion of the TV dinner industry, right? So you can thank the woman working for your Hot Pockets or for your what they call Tostinos. What are the ones? I love those little pizza pockets. Love those. Anyways, you can thank the woman working for that, right? Because one of the one of the things that happened when women started working was obviously they didn't have time to make dinner, right? And so what do? They had to go to the store and buy something, you know, to eat real quick. And that was the explosion of the TV dinner industry, right? And that is a great example of how women working caused all these different changes in all these different places in society. Okay. That is because like again, you would expect like it's a very direct correlation between women working and women being more accepted in the workplace. But you probably wouldn't have thought that the TV dinner industry exploded because of women working. That is the type of stuff we're talking about with culture. When you change one thing, everything else changes. Okay. The thing about the role of like, oh, think about mail, right? Think about mail. I guarantee you, no one was thinking in their head like, oh, Amazon, like the online shopping is gonna save mail. You know what I mean? I mean, you guys weren't, or you guys probably weren't alive, but like when I was early in the early to mid to well, early 2000s to like 2010 or so, right? Dude, the mail industry was in some stuff, you know, because people started text messaging, people were emailing each other, and regular paper mail was like super like no one was using it anymore, right? But now, guess what? Guess what saved that industry or what saved the postal services is Amazon and stuff like that, where you ship stuff back and forth, right? Now they're doing that. Okay. And if you notice, there's a lot more options for those types of things now than there are for just regular letters. Okay. Again, another unintended consequence of the boom that is email and all this other stuff. Right. Okay. So those are the things we're talking about. When we're talking about culture, we're talking about a system that one thing affects the next thing, affects the next thing, affects the next thing. And part of anthropology is discovering what those things are. Okay. Cultures train their individual members to share certain personality traits, a set of characters and core values, integrates each culture and helps distinguish from others. So I don't. This is kind of whatever, but like one of the things of America is like the underdog story. So if you look at most, if not all, of the popular American movies, right, it's always like breaking the rules. Someone always has to break rules. Oh, I'm a cop. I wasn't allowed to investigate this, but you know what? I'm gonna give him my badge. My sense is better. I'm gonna give him my badge and my gun, and I'm gonna go chase this whatever anyway, right? Most of the Disney movies are actually people just like breaking rules. No one is ever like, hey, I'm gonna follow these rules and get the result. No, everyone always has to break the rules somehow or some way. And that's kind of like a popular American theme. It's like breaking the rules to get something done. Okay. All right. So real quickly, we talked about the pizza ethnography. I'm gonna give you a better ethnography. Oops, whoa. I'm gonna give you a better ethnography uh, uh, to watch right now. Depending, oof, my computer is freaking out. Depending on whether the what's it called whether the what you call it will let it go the trademark people will let it go or not. I might have to post this video as a Zoom link, but we'll see. All right, so I'm gonna play this now. Is it recording? Is it recording? Yes. Okay. Ready? Oh, let me mute myself. Actually, hold on. Let me. All right. Here we go. All right, so as you can see, that video was about or was from oh whoa. Okay. That video is from the University of Kyoto in Japan. And sorry, let me say. University of Kyoto in Japan. And she is obviously an anthropologist, and she is a well-established anthropologist. She is an expert in the Karen people, who are a minority group in Thailand. They actually exist also in Cambodia. Um, but yeah, they are a minority group in Thailand. What's interesting about that though is that really, if you look at the video, right, she kind of like studies them first, like just as a whole first, right? And she might have a couple questions here and there, but as you notice at the end, what was her research goal? What was like the question that she wanted to answer? Was how they treated elders, right? But guess what? That research question was only in the last like 1 or 2 years. She's been researching the Karen people for like 30 years or whatever, right? 20 years. So what's interesting about ethnography is that because when you become an expert at ideally the people, you can go back there and kind of really have some rich understanding of how they would look at certain things, right? So like, obviously her understanding of, for example, how they treat elders is going to be much better because she has already had 30 years of experience going back and forth with them. So there, she's very familiar with most of their practices. And now it's just about having a certain focus on a certain topic, right? And also, it's no surprise that that's an interesting dilemma. I don't know if you guys have stay up to date on these things, but in Japan, they're actually having a problem because of the retired population. The older generation is so numerous in Japan that it's causing some issues in the society, right? And so it's no surprise that this is a topic that she finds very interesting. Okay, so again, everything is related to each other. But more importantly, what I want you to understand about ethnography is one, the basics, right? She literally just went there to live with them for a really long time. She knows how to speak their language. She knows their general customs. She knows their general understanding of the world. She knows, very important, she really understands how the world views them, or specifically Thai people, because they're in Thailand, how Thai people, mainstream Thai people view them, right? And she just understands a lot about them, right? And the second part is very interesting about ethnography is that you can go back with a new question and just kind of like add a little bit to it, and you get a very, very rich answer. Okay. That's the benefit of ethnography, is that you're literally living with those people. So you got to have a good perspective of how they do things and how they think. Oh, all right. So adaptive and maladaptive. Culture is sometimes adaptive, and it's something maladaptive. Basically what I'm saying is culture is sometimes good, sometimes bad, right? Culture is sometimes adaptive in the sense that, it might be good for living, but it's maladaptive in the sense that it might be bad for living. This goes back to the human imagination thing. You cannot predict what humans are doing because we don't do things only for good or only for bad. We do things for a lot of different reasons, right? So something that's adaptive is something like taking a walk after dinner, washing hands before you're eating. Recently, like eating a lot of vegetables. These are all good for your living or whatever, right? But maladaptive could be like smoking, CFCs, which are the chemicals in like the spray bottle stuff. Policies that encourage overpopulation, poor food distribution systems, overconsumption, environmental degradation. These are all things that are negative that we do that is also cultural, right? Like, is eating as much as we do for, I don't know, for Thanksgiving, or like, how in most restaurants, which I understand, is like, oh, it's like, how much are they giving you? Like, are they giving you a good amount? These types of things are not necessarily good for our health. But the problem, or not the problem, but the thing that you need to consider, the reason I list these examples at all, is because sometimes culture can help us live, and sometimes it doesn't. But the main point is that there is no pattern to recognize. It really just depends on the situation and the people. All right, so universality in particular, universality, generality, and particularity. Anthropologists agree that cultural learning is uniquely elaborated among humans and that all humans have culture. Anthropologists also agree that although individuals differ in their emotional and intellectual tendencies and capacities, all human populations have equivalent capacities for culture, regardless of their genes or their physical appearance. people can learn any culture tradition. And then similar culture, call that producer. Okay. So a lot of people will tell you that humans are equal, right? But if you ask them why, it's kind of not broken down very well. Anthropology is one of the fields that has a clear breakdown as to why humans are actually equal. It's because we all have the capacities to learn culture. And the capacity to learn culture is what makes us human, right? And that's what makes us equal. Now, this is very important though, because depending on, it's kind of hard to imagine now, but basically anything that is cultural can be learned by somebody else, right? And it's very you'd be surprised how not dependent on your natural ability it is. So for example, the example I've been given in class is like Harvard, right? Oh, actually, no, this is not the Harvard one. What is this one? What are they doing? EQ capacity for culture. Um, yeah, but anyway, so if everything is culture, then everyone can do everything, right? It just depends on whether or not that person has learned or has been in an environment which encourages that kind of cultural practice, right? You'd be surprised how this works like later on, in life. I'm trying to think. Oh, like when you go to school, right? Like it's not necessarily like do you get good grades and all this stuff. It's like, do you know how to get good grades, right? Do you know how people communicate? Do you know how to write an essay in the correct format? Do you know how to email your professors and be polite or whatever, right? These are kind of the things that are affecting you when you're getting into college and stuff like that, right? But anyways, regardless, oh, and also another thing I had to put, people think that sports are like these things that are completely like biological. It is not. And I can say this firsthand, a lot of people who are fighters or whatever, we are bound by the rules of the ring. And that doesn't necessarily mean, all right, sorry, we're bound by the rule, by the situation. It doesn't necessarily mean one fighter is better than the other, right? Someone could be really good at weight cutting. Someone could perform really well under the pressure of the bright lights. What if someone doesn't perform well? Does that mean, but then they could beat the crap out of them in the gym? Does that mean that that person's not a good fighter? Like how, I've learned actually, and as you go through it, you kind of have to have a good relationship with the promoters and people that are setting up the fights for you. There's a whole litany of things that you have to do that does nothing to do with fighting, that would make you more popular and considered the best or the worst fighter depending on how you go about it, right? Now, I was going to say that, of course, there is a big factor of your physical or mental abilities in that sense, but everyone can get to a certain point there, right? And you have to ask yourself how much of this is based off of my understanding of how things work. You know what I mean? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit of this a little bit later, but that's kind of what you understand. Anthropologists believe humans are equal because we have equivalent capacities for culture. Okay. If it's cultural, if it's learnable, then anyone can learn it. Now, cultural rules. Wait, how many more? Oh shoot, we have quite a few more. You know what? Let's end it right here, and then I will continue on the next one. But it'll be cool. Don't worry, it'll be good. All right. So, real quickly, just make sure you get your quiz in, and that's pretty much it this week. Okay. All right. You have any questions? Shoot me an email. I really apologize for any things that have gone wrong. Brightspace is being a pain in the butt, but we're gonna figure it out as we go. Okay. All right, guys. I appreciate you. Have a good day or night.